I have a little preamble. Today we're discussing the inequitable relationship between Central DuPage Hospital and the Village of Winfield. At our July 4th board meeting, we started this conversation, and board members had questions regarding CDH's governance, their financial situation, and the impact on the village. We'll start with a presentation that provides the facts related to these questions. When the presentation is complete, I'll turn the discussion over to the board. I'd like the board members to consider the following questions and ask that we give direction for future public discussion. Item 1, burden versus fair share. As noted previously, there's an inequitable financial relationship between CDH and the village. This is characterized as to what services we provide them for free, which we call the burden, versus the resources they should be providing to the village, which might be called fair share. Question 2, Citizen Steering Task Force. The Comprehensive Plan Steering Task Force was a key element of the successful completion of the comp plan. This provided valuable evaluation that was used by the board as part of the public process. So the question is, should the village president appoint a citizen steering committee to provide independent evaluation of the village's position and further evaluation options? And if so, do you think this new steering committee should have a facilitator, like we did for the comp plan? Question 3, what are the next steps? I would like to ask my colleagues on the board what other key data might be required after we have this discussion. Also, identify what other options the village might have to address the inequitable financial relationship. And should the village consider hiring outside expertise to answer some key questions? Now, before we get going, I'd like to offer some kudos to village staff. Again, the board members asked the questions, and the village staff worked very diligently to address those. And I know in particular, Manager Barrett and our Finance Director McCammon have done an awful lot of work in the last couple of weeks to get all this pulled together. So thank you very much, and I appreciate all of your fine work. So with that, I will turn the discussion over to Manager Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. We do have a short PowerPoint presentation with some comments that we really, in the era of big data and scads of information we have come across just in the last 6 to 8 weeks, really boiling down what we think are the key pertinent facts to understand the parameters of the topic and how it affects the village and its residents. But I certainly think we're aimed at talking about what it means to be a hospital town. We're a small town with a big hospital. I think part of that requires an objective look at it, includes singing some praises about what it means to be that hospital town with Central DuPage Hospital, and now it's Northwest Medicine Central DuPage Hospital, and certainly recognized among the top 100 hospitals in the nation consistently. Brings a mark of prestige to our community. Certainly a destination that people know Winfield by. The reason they may come perchance to visit here, and some end up becoming residents in this lovely town. In terms of that corporate brand recognition, I think certainly the cachet of CDH is very well regarded in the region across many different levels. Part of that probably is also due to the marketing efforts. And I think I would only venture a guess at the kind of marketing budget that entity uses. Certainly, you can't turn on the radio without hearing it, and the always thinking, always caring type of theme. And there's just a lot of different superlatives and positives, I think, that people regionally can point to associated with the hospital that has grown up over the decades in Winfield. That said, to get to some information that I think would help, and you're going to be my switch man there, we can move into it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take it from here, at least for this part. When we were talking about the village's relationship with CDH, I mean, it's had its ups and downs. In order to understand why we're having this discussion now, it's useful to put some of the issues into perspective. And so that's why we have a timeline. First off, we're going to back up to the early 2000s. And in the early 2000s, our friends at CDH surprised all of Winfield by purchasing Frank's Finer Foods, our only supermarket. They bulldozed it and put up a temporary parking lot. Winfield residents at that time were not very happy about that. About the same time, CDH also purchased Winfield's only funeral home, bulldozed it, and put up another temporary parking lot. Again, Winfield residents really didn't like that either. And also in that same time, CDH informed the village they were building a big parking deck. The village had no real say in the matter. The board responded after that was done by putting a planned unit development, a type of zoning, on top of the village's or the hospital's campus, so that in the future we would have at least some sort of say. These actions were not viewed kindly by residents of Winfield, and they are remembered to this day, coloring many residents' opinions of Central DuPage Hospital. Now let's fast forward about a decade. I was sworn in as village president in April 2013, and almost immediately, CDH approached me saying they needed 500 parking spots outside of their campus because of a severe parking shortage. And in mid-2013, the village and CDH started discussions on how we might work together to redevelop Town Center. The meetings between the village and CDH occurred monthly to quarterly. By early 2014, the village board and CDH were discussing an outline of a Town Center redevelopment plan. No one had really committed to any specific proposal, but there was some momentum. But then, in mid-2014, CDH changed their position and surprised the village with a proposal that's to significantly expand their parking on and off their campus. Apparently, mutually beneficial redevelopment of Town Center was off the table until they had their parking needs met. Many on the village board were very disappointed on how this change was communicated, or more accurately, not communicated. The parking-only proposal ignored the interest of the village. In the meantime, village staff did work with CDH representatives on the parking-only plan, and there was a clear intent by CDH that the village board would then publicly consider their proposal. In fall 2014, CDH merged with Northwestern Medicine. Shortly after the merger, CDH formally withdrew their parking-only proposal just before it was going to be publicly discussed by the board. CDH then expressed an interest in reinitiating the Town Center discussions. In January of 2015, the village and what was now Northwestern Medicine Central DuPage Hospital met to get the Town Center discussions back on track. There was some discussion on Town Center redevelopment, but there were no promises or agreements in concept. By early 2015, the village board had approved CDH using, as you may recall, the St. John's parking lot that's south of the railroad tracks right by the creek. It was noted that this is a temporary parking plan, and it was not good planning, as CDH should have an integrated parking plan north of the railroad. And in April 2015, the new Winfield board was seated. And about that same time, CDH held a leadership luncheon where they presented misleading statements regarding what was supposedly a $1.9 million donation to the village. This false statement was strongly protested in a letter that I sent to CDH. It turns out that the $1.9 million donation is actually their water bill, and that's why it was considered to be deceptive. Looking back, this grossly misleading statement by CDH at an event attended by civic leaders from throughout DuPage County galvanized my administration and the new village board to lead a discussion that we are having today. It highlighted the huge gulf that exists between CDH and the village, and that we have acted to clarify the misstatements. In May of this year, CDH informed the village that they were canceling our planned executive meeting and ending discussions until further notice. Winfield board members were again disappointed. In June 2004, at board meeting, we publicly discussed the misleading statements by CDH at the leadership luncheon and started to set the record straight. Board members directed village staff to continue this discussion with a series of questions and concerns. We also started researching the village's inequitable relationship with CDH. Now, I'm also pleased to report, as I mentioned earlier, that we have now restarted an earnest conversation on an executive level between the village and Central DuPage Hospital. On July 9th, Manager Barrett, Finance Director McCammon, and I discussed Town Center redevelopment and this inequitable relationship that has been mentioned between the village and CDH. The discussions were frank, and both the village and the CDH acknowledged that difference of opinion on what exist, but we both agreed that we do need to continue the conversation and where we can resolve misunderstandings. So that's kind of the general timeline, and now I'll turn it back over to Manager Barrett.
Okay, Pete, if we can move to the next slide. I will say, in recent weeks, the further we've dug into this, the more surprises we have come across, and we want to summarize those for discussion this evening. First of all, just want to put up a parcel map of our downtown area in Winfield to point out what the coverage is. Currently, with the growth, particularly in recent decades of the hospital, of all the area in the downtown that is zoned for business development, Center DuPage Hospital now controls just almost 60% of it. And the practical impact of that is that the vast majority of those properties are then tax exempt and are off the tax rolls. And so that greatly constrains that source of potential revenue from various kinds of taxes, property taxes, sales tax, et cetera, that might otherwise be available to the community. And as we start to try to quantify and measure just what the extent of that is and how much of that burden is shifted then solely to property owners in Winfield who are not tax exempt, the numbers are staggering. When we look at this map here, maybe we'll move to the next one. So this just is showing the close to 60%. You can see here, this is an aerial photo which will better reflect many of the structures that have been built that people are familiar with. Of course, the large bed pavilion is the T-shaped figure. To give you a sense of scale, that was estimated at several $100 million in value. My understanding, that was paid for all in cash. And the resources are just something we're not used to even getting our arms around. But what that did is provide new beds, and actually single rooms instead of traditional double rooms they previously used, new beds. And it's something like a hotel. I mean, what a lovely facility. But more along the lines of 4-star accommodations, it cleared out all the beds the hospital had elsewhere. And so in terms of expansion of their abilities, it was a great move for the hospital. And so it's cleared up a lot of different space in other areas of the hospital campus where they used to have beds that have been relocated. Gives further development opportunity for clinical use and other kinds of medical uses on that campus, which also is driving the additional need for parking, which they're struggling with, and frankly, as some within the organization know, we're starting to see just daily commuters running into the same issues just to get onto the train, and so parking continues to be a growing challenge in Winfield. The one thing not shown on the map at the time this aerial photo was taken would be completion of the Ronald McDonald House. It could be up here on the other side of Winfield Road. It is notable to point out just how much of the area west of the hospital campus proper is also owned by Center DuPage Hospital, and with really the exception of the fire station and the bank. And certainly Ronald McDonald House, another example, a plum for that hospital to have, certainly another feather in the cap to point to. I think there's some mention of the property there being left on the property tax rolls. My understanding, it does not apply to the structure, however, and so it's a much reduced value in that kind of an example. And if we, as we go through the numbers, I think it'll become a little more telling. Here is the infamous chart that had been presented to all the mayors and managers and superintendents and county board representatives, really quite a group that had been gathered together 2 months ago at CDH for their summit. And I can tell you, sitting there, when it went from just talking about all the advances and successes of the hospital to a slide that honed in just on Winfield and the help they provide to Winfield, was somewhat jaw-dropping. Why is that happening? You know, does it tie into some of the maybe struggles with conversations we've been attempting to have on building a partnership? I guess it's a head scratcher, particularly in light that as we've gone back and asked to have the same kind of information that's been publicized here about Winfield, to get those same numbers for the other towns that the hospital serves, they've declined to share that information. So on the one hand, they're publicizing it to the region, but then refusing to release the same kind of information about the other towns, and certainly that raises questions. But going through the chart, the thing that certainly right off the bat, Village President Spandy has touched on, the lead-off figure, and this is a chart of annual grants and donations is how this is addressed. You'll recall we've gone through this in some detail at a previous meeting, so I just want to break down a couple key elements. But this $1.9 million revenue figure, in fact, most of that is the water and sewer bills they pay just like any other property owner in town. And so it's being presented as a donation to the village, but really they're just paying their bills like anybody else pays. And so that clearly was a misrepresentation. They have, at least in a letter, owed up to that. I don't feel that there's been amends made to the audience that heard that from the region to clarify that, which I think would have been a more appropriate step. But at any rate, about $1.4 million of that figure is just their water and sewer bill. They're by far the largest user in the village. Further breakdown, also built into there are a few locations in the downtown area. They are required to pay some property taxes. They paid $29,000 in property taxes the most recent year to the village. Now, when you think about how much is $29,000 in property taxes, there's probably several different areas in the village where in one block, that's kind of what the property tax bill is. So it's a really small amount in comparison to what kind of property taxes do get generated just by our small community of a little over 9,000 residents. Also built into that number, there's a little bit of income and sales tax that do apply to the Walgreens that's within the hospital and the gift shop within the hospital. But again, I would suggest those are very small revenue streams coming to the community from their gift shop. The other number that is baked into there would be permit fees. So again, that's being represented as donations to the village when they come in they're constantly doing one kind of project or another over there. There's a constant stream of plan reviews and permit applications that we go through. We have inspectors then that need to inspect the work, and that's a cost to the village. The village is the community, and so that's a cost that Winfield incurs. And so we have charges for the plan review service. There's charges for sending an inspector over. Same way, if you want to build an addition on your house, there's a cost and you pay for the permit and for the plan review. It's the same thing with the hospital. So again, that's by no means a donation. That really is a very legitimate charge that we raise for services we provide. Moving down, just a little more quickly, they're getting here at charity care figures. They've broken out of their whole service area the charity care just in Winfield as they estimate it. And I'm not in a position to dispute that. I don't think that's what we seek to do. We're just trying to understand how the numbers work here at this point. And this first one, $2.1 million free care to Winfield residents. So that's going to be situations where people come into the hospital, don't have health insurance coverage, and the hospital does not turn them away. That's one of the requirements to keep tax-exempt status for a hospital, is to not turn anyone away. Obviously, the law is changing with the Federal Affordable Care Act also, so the landscape's changing for hospitals. There won't be as many people coming in without coverage over the course of time as where the federal government has the states heading. And that's part of the changing equation certainly the hospital administrators are dealing with and that everyone's dealing with as you make your choice about your own health insurance coverage or for employees at your place of business. At any rate, that's what that's getting at. Free care is for people that don't have coverage in Winfield that the residents they're suggesting from Winfield. Next figure, 1.8 million. So about 4 million between these two charity figures. unreimbursed Medicaid to Winfield residents. So that's not somebody from Wheaton that comes over here. They're saying just for Winfield folks that are on Medicaid, that's the difference between the cost the hospital incurs and how much they're able to get reimbursed through Medicaid. There's a gap of 1.8 million is what their numbers suggest, that they have to eat those costs. So again, those two figures, about $4 million just in Winfield, they're suggesting, of charity care. Again, to have a fair look at the assistance they do provide as a core entity within our community. They do break out some of the other help they give, and I do understand that I would take these to be accurate figures. A $200,000 annual donation to the fire department. Now remember, they're tax exempt, so the fire department, which its real source of income is through property taxes, is not getting those from the hospital. And in lieu, at a much lower kind of cost level, the hospital is choosing to make a $200,000 donation as far as that will go for the fire service. $100,000 Winfield Community Chest, certainly something we recognize on an annual basis, our thankfulness for that help. So the hospital does, out of its dollars, give a grant to this community. They asked the village to serve as a panel to make some decisions, but all the different groups in town, whether it's the Winfield in Action sports teams or a variety of different nonprofit groups or the churches or the schools, can come and apply for different projects that can be funded by that grant. We are the clearinghouse of the village. By no means is that $100,000 that comes to the village government. We can apply for portions of that and do try to get a share, and we typically are awarded some smaller portion of that as well, but by no means the majority of that grant. Then a $100,000 unrestricted grant. In the last 2 years, the hospital has, after some petitioning and discussions, agreed to provide $100,000, really no strings attached, to help the village. I think that reflects the village's need and true situation as a lean organization that doesn't have great revenue sources, and that also certainly has some arguments for services we provide free of charge to the hospital. And it's been set up something of a community allowance to Winfield. And so it's been doled out in $25,000 increments quarterly. And there's been a number of times over those 2 years where our allowance has been withheld. And I would suggest it may kind of match up with times when there's been friction. At this point in time, the commitment from last fiscal year there is a $25,000 check that was not sent, so there's some friction again. Beyond that, some school support, which goes, I believe, to crossing guards, and I think ties back to the traffic they generate. We'll be getting to that momentarily. And some scholarship funds for some of the different special events in town. And we certainly want to recognize all these different things. They do add up to a significant amount. I think the dilemma, as we've looked much closer, is it really isn't anywhere near what the costs of services and what the share were they being in terms of the government support doing the same thing the registered property owners do. And of course they have their own set of rules by state legislation that apply to them. But I think that's probably enough for this point. To move on to the next slide, but to understand the different sources. Now we added up, let's talk specifically about the village government. So we're not talking about the schools or other units of government in town. We're talking about the village government, and certainly that's the board here and the staff work for the village. And our bottom line, we understand some of the shortcomings we have. Our police force, for example, is not sized to the level we would have it given the funds. Our pension payments, we struggle to keep up with that. Road maintenance is certainly something the community has really had to stretch to address it, and the list goes on. And so when we talk about what kind of assistance do we get directly from CDH to the village government, here's a breakdown over the last 5 years we're looking at. Road funding, there was a one-time check made about 5 years ago in an amount of $300,000, and that would cover a little less than a mile of road work, given the current market for road repairs. The underpass, a $50,000 grant, was also given back at that time. Riverwalk, there was a matching donation, and our local advocates group of volunteers for the Riverwalk has been able to match that sum. So there's 80 grand that was raised locally, and the hospital matched it. General fund, in 2 different years, this community allowance, actually, there was a commitment. It's only been $75,000 for that later one. And then water and sewer fund, this would be the water tower that the hospital graciously paid for refurbishing and painting right next to their campus. And so want to recognize the things that they have helped us in. We add these up, and of course, this does not include the community chest. We talked about that doesn't go directly to the village. That gets divvied up among 15 different groups. If you average up the assistance financially that the hospital has provided to the Village of Winfield over the last 5 years, it's averaged less than $200,000 a year. So that's an important number to keep in mind. Let's suggest with some of the community grant dollars that we do use, maybe let's call it 200 grand. 200 grand a year, Center DeBage Hospital assists the village with while they enjoy this tax exemption. Can we go to the next slide, please? Impacts of CDH on Winfield. Some of these are obvious. CDH is the largest single user of roads, and based on the collection of most recent traffic studies, is estimated that the hospital does generate over 10,000 vehicular trips a day to the hospital campus. Largest user of water, the water and sewer system. In recent years, they've averaged about 1.4 million. You remember that earlier slide that they were putting out there showed that as a donation. In fact, that's just them paying their water and sewer bill, which helps pay for the costs of running that system like anybody else who has to pay that bill. Actually, I'd ask Dan to maybe expand a little bit if the village engineer could talk in a little more detail. The water and sewer, that utility system in our town, it's sized to meet the needs not just of the residential community, but really now with the hospital. Could you touch on that?
The hospital is using about 25% of facilities. It's getting close to 25% water, and that goes back over to sewer. The system's sized to meet that demand, and also is sized because it is a commercial building to meet the fire flows of 3,500 gallons per minute. So there is some oversizing in the water towers, the pump station, and the mains that is directly attributed to the hospital. The same goes with the sewer system leaving the hospital, and our pump stations are sized to also meet that demand.
Then, largest source of police calls far and away in the village for a range of situations. I did ask our new chief, who hopefully has not had to respond to too many calls over CH yet, but I know we have already had some interesting ones. But just in general, could you at least speak to the range of different kinds of calls that would take our police, our patrolmen, off our streets onto the campus?
In looking at what's transpired in this calendar year, CDH does employ their own professional security force within their campus. But anything that transfers over from a minor incident to an incident that would be considered an unlawful event or a crime, they're required to call the police department to take that report. Being their size, they experience the gamut of law enforcement related calls just like the village does. They have a significant number of suicide threat calls based on the behavioral health unit that they employ over there. Subjects walking away from that unit against advice that are a danger to themselves that we're then asked to go and locate and get back to the facility. We have people refusing to leave the hospital, believe it or that the hospital has completed their treatment, and for one reason or another, they don't want to leave, so we need to escort them off the property. We have thefts of both items inside the building and out in the parking lots that we are taking reports on. We have domestic disputes within the property, the hospital proper property. And then we move into the traffic-related items, away from the public safety and into the traffic safety. We have a large number of private property accidents based on people parking in fire lanes, people backing out inappropriately, people making spots where they're not specifically designated. That leads us to a higher level of parking enforcement in an effort to try and avoid some of those private property car accidents. So basically, the campus is a village within the village, if you will, as far as law enforcement activity.
Thank you, Chief. Moving on here. Also, beyond largest user of roads, largest user of our water and sewer system, largest source of police calls in the village, also certainly the largest property owner. They enjoy their fair share of benefits for all of the range of services the village government is responsible for providing. The one situation out of all these where they come close to actually carrying their weight for the cost to our community to provide these basic services would be the water and sewer system, which is a pay-as-you-go, an enterprise fund. Regardless of their nonprofit status, they have to pay, as anyone else does, a unit cost for their usage of water and sewer. And so that's pay-as-you-go for those utilities through the user fee. But in all these other instances, and really the even wider range of from building and code enforcement to dealings to protect this community from any other kinds of health issues or threats to quality of life, interactions with the other level of governments, et cetera, that you pay for your village government, those are things that are not captured because of their tax exemption. So there really is a free rider situation that the hospital enjoys on all other village services that are funded by local tax revenue. The last point I'll make here, and I think it is core to the issue, is that our village staff size and the service levels our residents enjoy are constrained by the limited resources we have. And one of the cruxes, as we've tried to talk through this issue with hospital administrators, they prefer just looking at, well, if there's a little gap where you spend, where your police costs are higher than the $200,000 we give you, maybe we could just cover that difference and put this to rest. But the true issue is our police department is very limited in scope and size because of the dilemma of how much nonprofit area there is in town. And so the real gap, just for police services, is that we'd have a more robust police force if we had a more fair share kind of arrangement, and we're talking to our biggest source of police calls, and that's just for that one service area. If we go to the next slide. Authority and accountability within the Northwestern Medical Health System. There are a number of questions that we have repeatedly raised now with the leadership over at Central DuPage with regard to the governance structure they have. Where is final decision-making authority, and who holds them accountable when there are things such as public misstatements that really go over the top. Just one example. Those questions to the hospital, they've declined to answer repeatedly. We've not been given information about who ultimately is on their board, what the decision-making process is within their organization, so on and so forth, which I would suggest is quite troubling. I don't think there's a good reason why basic questions like that from the village would not be answered by the hospital. What we have been able to research and discern on our own is some basics on the structure. And I guess I would point out, the charts I'm going to show here do reflect there's certainly a complexity within their health care system as we can make it out of it. It's both for regulatory and financial purposes. Here we see Northwestern Memorial Healthcare, and of course, Center DuPage merged in 2013 with Delnor Hospital out in Geneva to become Cadence. And within 2 years, that Cadence group merged or was bought up, I think it depends how you look at it, by the Northwestern Medicine Group, which is based on the North Shore, based in the Streeterville campus in Chicago, clearly associated historically with Northwestern University.